She had disappeared so slowly, she didn't even notice she was gone, until a man who'd never met her looked at her like she'd been there all along. Elena Winters had perfected the art of being invisible. It hadn't happened overnight. Invisibility was a skill learned in increments. A dismissed sentence here, an interrupted thought there, 1,000 small moments where her presence in a room was acknowledged with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for furniture. She stood at the kitchen counter of their Westbridge penthouse, pouring coffee into 2 cups. One with cream, no sugar. One black. She knew Adrian's preference better than her own, because hers had stopped matching 3 years into their 7-year marriage. The morning light slanted through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the marble countertops, the fresh orchids she replaced every week, the Williams-Sonoma cookbook she'd never opened because Adrian preferred eating out. Everything in the kitchen gleamed with the sterile perfection of a showroom. Just like their marriage. "Your coffee," she said softly, setting the cup beside his iPad. Adrian Winters didn't look up. His thumb scrolled through emails with the mechanical precision of a man for whom even breakfast was a networking opportunity. At 42, he'd kept his athletic build and sharp features, the kind of handsome that photographed well at charity events. His salt and pepper hair was styled with the same attention he gave everything that might be seen by others. Everything except her. He responded. Not a thank you. Not even eye contact. Just a sound that acknowledged her service. Elena's hand tightened around her own cup. She wore a beige cashmere sweater, expensive but unremarkable, and tailored pants in a neutral taupe. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. No jewelry except her wedding ring, which felt heavier every day. She'd learned to dress like wallpaper. It was safer that way. Don't forget, she ventured, the Harrington Gala is tonight. 7 o'clock. I know my own schedule, Elena. His tone was clipped, efficient. The way he spoke to his assistant. She swallowed the words that wanted to come next. Asterisk, when did I become someone you can't even look at? When did I become so easy to dismiss? Asterisk. But she said nothing. She'd learned that too. Adrian stood abruptly, grabbing his coffee and his Italian leather briefcase in one smooth motion. I'll meet you there. I have back-to-back meetings until 6:30. Should I? Wear whatever you want. I don't care. I don't care. For words that shouldn't hurt as much as they did. But they landed in her chest with the weight of accumulated indifference, years of whatever you think, and does it matter? And the worst one of all. The silence that confirmed she could disappear entirely, and he wouldn't notice until he needed something. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Elena stood alone in the pristine kitchen, surrounded by luxury that felt like a museum to a life she'd never actually lived. She caught her reflection in the dark screen of the smart fridge. A woman of 34 who looked both younger and infinitely older. Her face pretty in an unmemorable way because she'd learned to take up as little space as possible. When did I become a ghost? She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, and it was too painful to acknowledge. Across the city, in the obsidian tower that bore his name, Damien Stone stood at the window of his penthouse office and felt nothing. It was his natural state. At 39, he'd built an empire in commercial real estate that made him one of the youngest billionaires in the state. Stone Enterprises owned half the skyline he was currently surveying. His suits were custom Brioni. His watch was a vintage Patek Philippe. His penthouse occupied the entire 48th floor and was decorated by an award-winning designer in shades of black, gray, and steel. Everything was perfect. Everything was empty. Mr. Stone. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your tuxedo has arrived for tonight's event, and your date has confirmed. Damien's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Cancel the date. Sir, you heard me, Jessica. Send her flowers with my apologies. I'll attend alone. A pause. Of course, Mr. Stone. He released the intercom button and returned his gaze to the city below. Tiny cars moved through streets like blood cells through veins, everyone rushing towards something they believed mattered. The Harrington Charity Gala. Another obligation. Another evening of forced smiles and calculated conversations with people who wanted access to his wealth or his influence. Another performance. He'd stopped bringing dates 2 years ago because pretending to care about someone for an entire evening had become exhausting. It was easier to go alone, write the check, and leave. Damien moved to his desk, a massive slab of black walnut, and sat in the leather chair that had cost more than most people's cars. His office was immaculate. No family photos. No personal touches. Just awards, architectural models of his developments, and a single painting. A Rothko print, all bleeding reds and blacks, chaos contained within a frame. He understood that painting. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother. Asterisk another gala alone? You're becoming a cliché, D. The lonely billionaire. Asterisk. Damien didn't respond. His brother Marcus, damn it, his brother Ryan, meant well, but he didn't understand. After Vanessa, after discovering that the woman he'd planned to marry had been sleeping with his former business partner while planning their wedding, Damien had made a choice. Solitude was safer than betrayal. Control was better than vulnerability. And love. Love was a fairy tale people told themselves to justify their own weaknesses. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with military precision. Tonight would be like every other night. Smile, write the check, leave. No connections. No complications. No risk. As he prepared to leave, his reflection caught in the floor-to-ceiling window. A tall figure in an expensive suit, backlit by the setting sun, looking every bit the powerful man the world believed him to be. But he knew the truth. He was as empty as the penthouse he returned to every night. He just wore it better than most. Asterisk, have you ever felt invisible in your own life, or watched someone slowly disappear while everyone else just looked away? Drop a comment below. Sometimes naming the feeling is the first step to changing it. Elena stood in front of her walk-in closet, staring at the rows of muted colors like a prisoner examining the bars of her cage. Beige, taupe, cream, soft gray, blush pink so pale it was almost white. Wear whatever you want. I don't care. Adrian's words echoed in the silence of their bedroom. She reached for a champagne-colored gown, safe, elegant, forgettable. Her hand hovered over the hanger. Then she saw it. Tucked in the back corner, tag still attached, was a dress she'd bought 2 years ago in a moment of reckless hope. She'd seen it in a boutique window, and something in her chest had cracked open. She'd bought it with her own money from the account Adrian barely noticed, brought it home, and hidden it immediately, ashamed of her own audacity. The dress was red. Not a polite red. Not a demure burgundy or a sophisticated wine. It was the red of stop signs and lipstick kisses and flamenco dancers. It was short, mid-thigh, with a fitted bodice and a neckline that suggested rather than revealed. It was the dress of a woman who wanted to be seen. Elena's hand trembled as she pulled it from the closet. The silk whispered against her fingers like a secret, like a dare. He doesn't care what you wear. The thought should have hurt. Instead, it felt like permission. She put on the dress. Underscore 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 underscore. The Harrington estate was lit up like a castle, all white columns and glittering chandeliers visible through massive windows. Valets in crisp uniforms directed a parade of luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Maseratis, Teslas with that quiet hum of wealth. Elena stepped out of their Mercedes alone. Adrian had texted that he'd arrive late, some last-minute client call. She wasn't surprised. She'd stopped being surprised 3 years ago. But tonight, walking up those marble steps in a red dress that moved against her skin like water, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Fear. Not of judgment. She'd lived with that for so long it had become background noise. No, this was different. This was the fear of a woman who'd been sleeping and suddenly, violently woke up. The fear of realizing you've been holding your breath and suddenly remembering how to breathe hurts. The ballroom was exactly what she'd expected, a cathedral of wealth and performance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light over women in designer gowns and men in tuxedos that cost more than monthly salaries. Champagne flutes glinted like small suns. A string quartet played something classical and safe in the corner. She stepped inside, and the air changed. It wasn't dramatic, no record scratch, no sudden silence. But Elena felt it like a temperature drop, like the moment before lightning strikes. People's eyes slid over her and then back, double takes disguised as casual glances. She was visible. The sensation was so foreign, so overwhelming, that for a moment she forgot how to walk. Her heels clicked against marble, and the sound felt too loud, like her presence was an announcement she hadn't meant to make. Elena. She turned to see Marjorie Pemberton, one of Adrian's colleagues' wives, eyebrows raised in a way that could have been admiration or judgment. With women like Marjorie, it was always both. That's quite a departure for you, Marjorie said, air kissing near Elena's cheek. Bold choice. Bold. The word felt like an accusation wrapped in compliment paper. Thank you, Elena said, and was surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. She moved deeper into the ballroom, accepting a champagne flute from a passing waiter more for something to hold than any desire to drink. She scanned the crowd for Adrian, knowing she wouldn't find him yet, and that's when she felt it. The gaze. It was different from the others, not a glance or a sweep, but a fixed point of attention so intense it was almost physical. Like standing in a spotlight. Like being the only person in a room. Elena turned. Across the ballroom, through the moving crowd of the city's elite, a man was staring at her. Not glancing. Staring. He stood near the bar, a glass of what looked like whiskey untouched in his hand. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair styled in that effortlessly expensive way and a face that was more striking than handsome. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, and eyes that even from this distance looked dark and intense. He wore his tuxedo the way soldiers wore uniforms, with an edge of barely restrained power. But it wasn't his appearance that made her breath catch. It was the way he was looking at her. Like he saw her. Not the dress. Not the wife of Adrian Winters. Not a pretty accessory to be assessed and categorized. Her. Their eyes met, and Elena felt something slot into place in her chest. Some piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. The room seemed to recede, the music, the chatter, the clinking glasses, until there was just this, the space between them, charged and waiting. Then he moved. It wasn't a casual walk. It was purpose. He handed his glass to a passing waiter without looking, his eyes never leaving hers, and began crossing the ballroom. People shifted out of his path instinctively, sensing something in his trajectory that demanded clearance. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She should look away. She should move, find Adrian, remember herself. But she was frozen, pinned by a gaze that saw straight through 7 years of careful invisibility. He was 10 feet away. 5. Then he was standing in front of her, and the intensity of his presence up close was almost unbearable. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker, more essential. His eyes were the color of midnight, and they held hers with an urgency that made her feel like the only person who'd ever mattered. I don't know you, he said, his voice low and rough, like he'd surprised himself by speaking. But I need to. Elena's champagne flute trembled in her hand. Damien Stone. He didn't offer his hand. Didn't smile. Just stood there radiating barely contained. What? Intensity. Recognition. Something that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. Elena. Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. Elena Winters. Something flickered in his expression. A micro-reaction she couldn't read. Winters. He repeated the name like he was tasting it, testing it. You're here alone? It was a simple question. It shouldn't have felt like he was asking something deeper. My husband is. She gestured vaguely toward the entrance. He's running late. Husband. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes dropped to her left hand, to the wedding ring that suddenly felt like evidence of a crime she'd committed against herself. When his gaze returned to her face, there was something new there. Something that looked almost like anger, but not at her. For her. Then he's a fool, Damien said quietly. Because if you were mine, I would never let you walk into a room like this alone. The words landed in Elena's chest like stones into still water, sending ripples through places that had been numb for years. She should be offended. Should step back. Should say something about the inappropriateness of a stranger speaking to a married woman this way. But all she could think was, when was the last time anyone spoke to me like I was something precious? You don't know me, she whispered. No. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her feel like her skin was too thin, like he could see straight through to all the lonely, broken places she'd hidden. But I see you. 3 words. I see you. Elena felt something crack in her chest, not breaking, but breaking open, like the first fracture in ice before the spring thaw, like waking up from a nightmare and realizing you're safe, like being lost for so long you forgot what being found felt like. Tears burned behind her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. I'm sorry, Damien said, and his voice had gentled slightly. I'm not usually. I don't do this. Do what? Explode. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone. See someone across a room and forget every rule I've made for myself. Before Elena could respond, before she could process what he'd just admitted, a familiar voice cut through the moment like a blade. Elena. There you are. Adrian. She turned to see her husband approaching, phone still in his hand, barely glancing at her as he arrived. He was handsome in his tuxedo, polished and perfect. Everything a successful executive should be. He looked at her the way one might acknowledge a delivery that had arrived on time. Traffic was hell, Adrian said, already scanning the room for more important people. Then, as an afterthought, you wore the red dress. Not you look beautiful. Not I'm sorry I'm late. Just an observation, spoken with the same enthusiasm one might note the weather. Yes, Elena said quietly. Adrian's eyes finally landed on Damien, and his expression shifted into networking mode. The smile that didn't reach his eyes, the assessing gaze of a man calculating value. Adrian Winters. He extended his hand. I don't believe we've met. Damien's entire demeanor changed. The intensity that had been focused on Elena transformed into something controlled, cooled. When he shook Adrian's hand, his face was a perfect mask of polite neutrality. But Elena saw it, the slight tension in his jaw. The way his other hand curled into a fist at his side. Damien Stone. Stone Enterprises. Adrian's eyebrows rose. Stone. Of course. I've been hoping to meet you. Your waterfront development project. We should talk. Adrian Winters, Capital Management. I handle private equity for several major. I'm familiar with your firm, Damien interrupted smoothly. His eyes flicked to Elena, then back to Adrian. Your wife and I were just introducing ourselves. Wife. He said the word like it cost him something. Right, great. Adrian barely glanced at Elena. Listen, Stone, I'd love to schedule a meeting. I think we could. Perhaps, Damien said. His voice was professional, but there was steel underneath. Though I generally prefer to do business with people who value what they have. The words hung in the air. Adrian, oblivious to the double meaning, nodded eagerly. Absolutely. Smart policy. Here, let me give you my card. As Adrian fumbled for his wallet, Damien's eyes found Elena's one more time. And in that glance, she saw everything he couldn't say. He doesn't see you. But I do. And I can't unsee you. Then Adrian was pressing his business card into Damien's hand, already talking about market analyses and growth projections, and the moment shattered like glass. But Elena felt it in her bones. Something had shifted. Some door she'd thought was sealed forever had cracked open, and light, dangerous, beautiful light, was streaming through. She touched her throat, feeling her pulse racing beneath her fingertips. And Damien Stone, the billionaire who'd learned to feel nothing, stood 3 feet away trying to remember how to breathe around the woman in the red dress who'd just reminded him he was still human. It was terrifying. For both of them. Elena couldn't breathe. Elena jerked back from Damien as if they'd been caught doing something illicit, even though the space between them was perfectly proper. But guilt flooded through her anyway. Not for what she'd done, but for what she'd wanted to do. Adrian strode onto the balcony, barely glancing at Damien. I need you inside. The Harrisons want a photo with us for their foundation newsletter. Elena's voice was unsteady. Of course. Adrian finally seemed to register Damien's presence, and his expression flickered with confusion. Stone, what are you doing out here? Getting air, Damien said smoothly, his mask sliding back into place. Your wife and I were discussing the gardens. They're quite impressive. Right. Adrian was already checking his phone, already moving on. Elena, come on. We don't have all night. He turned and walked back inside without waiting to see if she'd follow. Elena stood frozen, caught between the man who owned her on paper and the man who'd seen her in a way that felt like ownership of a different kind. The kind you gave willingly because someone had finally asked for the parts of you that mattered. Go, Damien said quietly. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes said, don't. Stay. Let me see more of you. I'm sorry, Elena whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. She moved toward the doors, each step feeling like a betrayal, though of whom she couldn't say. Her hand was on the handle when Damien spoke again. Elena. She looked back. He stood silhouetted against the garden lights, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense. That dress, he said. It suits you. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it's honest. Don't let him make you invisible again. Then he turned away, gripping the balustrade and staring out at the darkness like a man trying to hold himself together. Elena slipped back inside. The ballroom hit her with noise and light, and the overwhelming sense of returning to a play where everyone knew their lines except her. She found Adrian near the photographer's setup, smiling that public smile he wore so well. "There you are," he said, slipping an arm around her waist for the camera. His touch was perfunctory, possessive in a way that had nothing to do with affection. "Smile, Elena." She smiled. The camera flashed. And through it all, she felt Damien's words wrapped around her like a promise or a curse. Don't let him make you invisible again. But as Adrian steered her through the rest of the evening, introducing her as my wife Elena to people who immediately forgot her name, keeping his hand on her lower back like she was a possession that might wander off, she felt herself fading. The red dress didn't matter. Being seen for 3 minutes didn't undo 7 years of erasure. By the time they left at 11, Elena had convinced herself that the encounter on the balcony had been an aberration, a moment of weakness, a fantasy that would dissolve in the harsh light of her real life. In the car, Adrian scrolled through his phone while Elena stared out the window at the passing city lights. "That Stone guy seemed interested in a meeting," Adrian said absently. "Could be a good connection. Big portfolio." Elena's chest tightened. "Is that all you think about? Connections?" Adrian glanced up, genuinely confused by her tone. "It's networking, Elena. It's what we do at these things." "We." As if she'd been doing anything but standing beside him like an accessory. "Right," she said quietly. "Of course." The rest of the drive passed in silence. When they arrived home, Adrian went straight to his study. He had emails to send, calls to prep for tomorrow. Elena walked through the penthouse alone, the red dress whispering against her legs. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror and stopped. The woman staring back at her looked lost. The dress that had felt like armor earlier now felt like evidence of her own foolishness. She'd worn it hoping to be seen by her husband, and instead, she'd been seen by a stranger. And God help her, being seen by Damien Stone had felt like coming home. She touched her cheek where his fingers had been, gentle and devastating. Then she went to her bedroom, the bedroom she no longer shared with Adrian, though they'd never formally acknowledged the separation, and carefully removed the red dress. She hung it in the back of the closet, and told herself she'd never wear it again. Meanwhile, across the city, Damien Stone stood in his penthouse staring at the skyline and trying to convince himself that he hadn't just met the woman who could destroy every wall he'd ever built. He'd left the gala immediately after Elena went inside. Couldn't bear to watch her stand beside that oblivious fool of a husband. Couldn't bear to see her disappear back into the role of the invisible wife. His whiskey sat untouched on the granite counter. His penthouse was silent except for the hum of the city below. He should forget her. Should write this off as a moment of uncharacteristic impulse. Should remember all the reasons he'd built his fortress in the first place. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her, a woman in a red dress, standing on a balcony, looking at him like he'd said something impossible. "I see you." And the terrifying truth was, he couldn't unsee her, no matter how hard he tried. Elena didn't hear from Damien Stone for 3 days. She told herself she was relieved. Told herself the encounter at the gala had been a fluke, a moment of weakness on both their parts that was best forgotten. She returned to her routine, morning coffee that Adrian didn't acknowledge, charity committee meetings where she was the most invisible person in the room, evenings alone in the penthouse while Adrian worked late. She did not wear the red dress again. She did think about Damien Stone, more than she wanted to admit. The way he'd looked at her. The way his voice had roughened when he said, "I see you." The way her entire body had responded to a touch on her cheek that lasted 3 seconds. It was dangerous. It was foolish. It was the most alive she'd felt in years. On the 4th day, Adrian came home early, 6:30 instead of his usual 9 or 10. Elena was in the kitchen, preparing a salad she'd eat alone, when she heard his key in the lock. "Elena!" His voice carried excitement, an emotion so rare she almost didn't recognize it. "Where are you?" "Kitchen," she called back, startled. Adrian strode in, loosening his tie with one hand while checking his phone with the other. But there was energy in his movements, a brightness in his expression she hadn't seen in years. "You'll never guess who called my office today," he said, finally looking at her, though his gaze was unfocused, directed more in her general direction than at her specifically. "Damien Stone." Elena's knife slipped, nearly catching her finger. "What?" "Stone. From the gala." Adrian was already pulling open the refrigerator, grabbing a beer. "He wants to meet. Said he's considering bringing some of his private investments to our firm. Do you know what kind of portfolio we're talking about? This could be huge, Elena. Huge." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "He wants to meet with you?" Well, technically he requested a dinner meeting. Business development, he said. Very informal. Adrian took a long drink, then added almost as an afterthought. He specifically asked if you'd be there. The room tilted slightly. Me? Yeah, I thought that was odd too. Adrian shrugged, oblivious to the way Elena had gone completely still. But these billionaire types have their quirks. Maybe he wants the family man angle. Makes me seem more stable or whatever. Anyway, I said yes. Dinner's tomorrow night at Marcello's. 7 o'clock. We're something nice. We're something nice. Not the red dress, she knew. Never the red dress. Adrian meant something appropriate. Something that would photograph well if needed. Something that would make her blend into the background while making him look good. Adrian, she said carefully, are you sure this is a good idea? He looked at her, genuinely confused. Why wouldn't it be? This is exactly the kind of client we've been trying to land. Stone Enterprises has a portfolio worth. I meant me being there. Her voice was quieter than she'd intended. If it's a business meeting. Elena, he asked for you specifically. I'm not going to screw this up by showing up alone. Adrian set down his beer, his expression shifting into the impatient look he got when she questioned him. This is important. Surely you can handle one dinner. Handle, as if her presence was a burden she needed to manage. Of course, she said softly. I'll be there. Good. Adrian picked up his phone, already moving toward his study. I have to prep. This needs to be perfect. He left her standing in the kitchen, her hands trembling against the marble counter. Damien Stone had arranged a dinner, had specifically requested her presence, had maneuvered himself into their lives under the guise of business. She should be angry, should recognize the manipulation for what it was. Instead, all she felt was a dangerous flutter of anticipation. Marcello's was the kind of restaurant where reservations took months, and the clientele whispered instead of talked. Soft lighting, Italian marble, and enough privacy between tables that conversations remained confidential. Elena wore a navy dress, elegant, modest, forgettable. She'd pulled her hair back in a low chignon and kept her makeup minimal. Everything about her appearance said, I am not here to be noticed. But when they arrived and were escorted to a private corner table where Damien Stone sat waiting, his eyes found hers immediately. And in that gaze, she saw recognition of exactly what she'd tried to do. He stood as they approached, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket in one smooth motion. In the candlelight, he looked even more striking than she remembered, sharp features, dark eyes that held too much understanding, and an intensity that seemed barely leashed. Winters. He shook Adrian's hand with professional warmth. Then he turned to Elena, and his entire demeanor shifted. Softened. Mrs. Winters. Thank you for joining us. Elena, she said quietly. Please. Something flickered in his expression. Elena. The way he said her name, like it meant something, like he was tasting it, sent heat through her veins. They sat. Adrian immediately launched into business talk, oblivious to the tension crackling across the table. He discussed market trends and portfolio diversification, and Damien listened with the polite attention of a man enduring a presentation. But his eyes kept returning to Elena. She focused on her water glass, her napkin, the abstract art on the far wall. Anywhere but those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed armor. The waiter arrived with menus. Adrian ordered a bottle of expensive wine without asking if anyone else wanted it. Damien ordered sparingly. Elena ordered the first thing she saw, having no appetite whatsoever. So, Stone, Adrian said, settling back with his wine glass. What made you consider our firm specifically? We're not the biggest in the city. No, Damien agreed. His gaze slid to Elena, held. But you have something other firms don't. What's that? Authenticity. The word was aimed at Adrian, but Damien was looking at Elena. I prefer working with people who value what's real, even when it's difficult to see. Elena's breath caught. Adrian, completely missing the subtext, nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly our philosophy. Real relationships, real results. Actually, Elena here. He gestured vaguely in her direction. She's always been good at the people side of things. Charity work, social connections, that kind of thing. That kind of thing. As if her entire existence could be reduced to decorative social functions. Is that so? Damien's attention fully fixed on her now. What kind of charity work? Elena opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth was, she'd been on half a dozen committees, but had never been allowed to actually do anything. She showed up, smiled, signed donation checks with Adrian's money, and disappeared. She faltered. She's modest, Adrian cut in. Too modest. She's on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation, the Arts Council, what was the other one, honey? He didn't actually wait for her to answer. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, and addressed Elena directly, cutting Adrian out of the conversation as if he'd ceased to exist. If you could do any kind of work, Damien said quietly, without limitations or expectations, what would you choose? The question was so unexpected, so genuinely curious, that Elena forgot to give the polite, acceptable answer. I'd teach, she said. The words came out before she could stop them. Literature. High school or college. I have a master's degree in English literature, but I never. She trailed off, suddenly aware of how much she'd revealed. Why didn't you? Damien asked. It wasn't practical, Adrian answered for her, already bored with the topic. The pay is terrible, and honestly, with my schedule, it made more sense for Elena to have flexibility. For entertaining, events, that sort of thing. Damien's expression was unreadable, but Elena saw his hand curl into a fist on the white tablecloth. So you gave up teaching to be available? The word hung in the air like an accusation. It was a mutual decision, Elena said quickly, though it hadn't been. Adrian had simply assumed, and she'd been too young and too in love to fight him. That was 9 years ago. A different lifetime. Of course, Damien said softly. But his eyes told her he knew. He knew she'd been erased one decision at a time, one sacrifice at a time, until there was nothing left but the ghost of who she'd wanted to be. The food arrived. Adrian dove into his steak while launching into a pitch about his firm's recent successes. Damien responded with appropriate questions, playing his role perfectly. But underneath the table, Elena felt his foot brush against hers. It could have been an accident. Should have been an accident. Except he didn't move it away. And neither did she. It was the barest contact, shoe leather against shoe leather, nothing illicit or inappropriate. But in the context of her touch-starved marriage, it felt like an inferno. Her entire awareness narrowed to that single point of connection. What do you think, Elena? She startled, realizing Adrian had asked her something. I'm sorry. I was just telling Stone about the vineyard property we looked at last summer. You loved it, remember? Said it would be perfect for private events. She had no memory of this. Likely because Adrian had spent the entire trip on conference calls while she'd walked the property alone. It was beautiful, she said neutrally. See, she gets it. Adrian signaled for more wine. Location, location, location. Damien's foot pressed slightly more firmly against hers. She glanced up and found him watching her with an expression that made her chest ache. It wasn't desire, or not just desire. It was something deeper. Recognition. Empathy. I see you suffering, his eyes said. And I don't know how to stop it. The meal continued. Adrian talked. Damien asked strategic questions. And Elena sat between them, feeling the weight of Damien's attention like gravity while her husband remained oblivious to everything except his own ambitions. Finally, Adrian excused himself to take a call. Just 5 minutes, it's Tokyo, I have to grab it. And disappeared toward the restaurant's entrance. The moment he was gone, the air between Elena and Damien changed. I'm sorry, Damien said quietly. For what? For this. For manipulating a business meeting to see you. His voice was rough with honesty. I told myself it was professional, that I was genuinely interested in his firm. But that's a lie. I just needed to see you again. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. You shouldn't say things like that. I know. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But watching him dismiss you, interrupt you, reduce you to a convenient accessory, Elena, it's taking everything in me not to tell him what I really think. Which is, that he's the luckiest man alive and too stupid to know it. Damien's eyes blazed in the candlelight. That if you were mine, I would never stop asking about your day, your thoughts, your dreams. That teaching literature isn't impractical. It's beautiful. That you deserve to be with someone who sees your worth. Stop, Elena breathed. Tears burned behind her eyes. Why? Because it hurts to hear? Or because you're starting to believe it? Before she could answer, Adrian's voice carried from across the restaurant. He was laughing at something, phone pressed to his ear, completely comfortable taking a call in the middle of a dinner he'd insisted was crucial. Damien sat back, his mask sliding into place, but not before Elena saw the flash of pain in his expression. How long have you been invisible to him? Damien asked. I don't know, Elena whispered. So long I forgot what being seen felt like. And now, she met his eyes. Now I remember. And I don't know if that's a gift or a curse. Adrian returned, pocketing his phone with a satisfied smile. Sorry about that. Tokyo deal. Where were we? Your wife, Damien said deliberately, was just telling me about her interest in teaching. Adrian blinked, confused. Oh, right. Well, like I said, not really practical. I disagree, Damien said smoothly. I think it's the most practical thing I've heard all evening. Passion is a rare commodity. It should be valued. He was still looking at Elena. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Damien agreed to a follow-up meeting. Adrian was thrilled. Elena felt like she was drowning and being saved simultaneously. When they finally left, Adrian was already on his phone again, texting his partners about the successful meeting. He handed the valet ticket to the attendant and walked a few steps away for privacy. Damien stood beside Elena in the cool night air. This was a mistake, she said quietly, staring at the ground. Was it? He didn't touch her, but she felt the pull of his presence like magnetism. Because from where I'm standing, the only mistake is that you're leaving with him instead of me. I'm married. You're imprisoned. Elena looked up sharply, anger flashing. You don't get to decide that. You're right. His voice gentled. Only you can. But Elena, I need you to know something. What? I'm not going anywhere. The words were a promise and a threat. I'll take these business meetings. I'll find reasons to be in your orbit. Not because I'm trying to destroy your marriage. I think your husband's doing that quite well on his own. But because now that I've seen you, I can't unsee you. And I refuse to watch you disappear without at least reminding you that you exist. The valet pulled up with their car. Adrian pocketed his phone and walked over, oblivious to the conversation he'd just missed. Great dinner, Stone. Let's definitely follow up next week. Absolutely. Damien shook his hand, then turned to Elena. Mrs. Winters, it was a pleasure. The word pleasure was loaded with everything he couldn't say. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. In the car, Adrian talked about the deal, the possibilities, the connections. Elena stared out the window and tried to remember how to breathe. Because Damien Stone had just told her he wasn't going anywhere. And the terrifying part? She didn't want him to. Asterisk, have you ever had someone see the real you when you'd forgotten who that was? Or watch someone you care about slowly disappear in a relationship? Drop your thoughts below. Your story might help someone else feel less alone. Asterisk. The follow-up meeting happened 6 days later at Adrian's office. Elena wasn't supposed to be there. It was a legitimate business discussion about portfolio management and investment strategies. But at the last minute, Adrian's assistant called in sick, and he needed someone to take notes. Elena can do it, Adrian had said into his phone, already assuming her availability. She's got nothing else going on today. She'd had a dental appointment she'd been trying to schedule for 3 months. She canceled it. The meeting was professional, efficient, and completely devoid of personal interaction. Damien arrived in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, shook hands with Adrian and his 2 partners, and proceeded to discuss financial projections with the focused intensity of a man who hadn't spent the last week thinking about a woman who wasn't his. But Elena knew better. Because every time Adrian turned to the presentation screen, Damien's eyes would find hers. Just for a second. Just long enough to say, I'm performing. So are you. And we both know it. She took notes in a leather portfolio, her handwriting careful and precise, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped every time she felt his gaze. The meeting ended after 90 minutes. Adrian walked Damien to the elevator, already talking about golf games and networking dinners. Elena stayed behind, gathering the scattered papers and forgotten coffee cups, playing the role she'd perfected. The invisible assistant to her own husband. She was reaching for a discarded notepad when she saw it. A business card, placed deliberately face down on the corner of the conference table where she'd been sitting. She glanced toward the door. Adrian and Damien were still by the elevators, visible through the glass wall. She flipped the card over. On the back, in bold, masculine handwriting, Brew and Page's Cafe. Tomorrow. 2 p.m., please. Her heart stopped, then started again too fast. She should throw it away. Should pretend she never saw it. Should absolutely not go to a cafe to meet a man who made her feel things her husband hadn't made her feel in years. She slipped the card into her pocket. Brew and Page's was the kind of cafe Elena would have loved if she'd still been the person who loved things. It was tucked into a quiet street in the arts district, with mismatched furniture, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and the rich smell of coffee and old paper. She arrived at 2:15, telling herself the 15-minute delay meant she wasn't eager. Wasn't desperate. Wasn't a married woman sneaking away to meet a man who saw her. Damien sat at a corner table near the window, a cup of black coffee untouched in front of him. He wore jeans, actual jeans, and a gray Henley that made him look younger, less like a billionaire and more like a man who was just human. He stood when he saw her, and the relief in his expression was so naked it hurt to see. "You came," he said. "I shouldn't have." But Elena sat down anyway, setting her purse carefully on the empty chair beside her like she might need to grab it and run. "I know." Damien sat across from her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. "Coffee. They have an incredible lavender latte here." "How do you know that?" Elena asked, then immediately felt foolish. As if billionaires didn't drink specialty coffee. But Damien smiled, a real smile, small and genuine. "I come here sometimes. When I need to remember what normal feels like." The barista is a 70-year-old woman named Ruth who doesn't know who I am and doesn't care. She makes me feel like a regular person instead of a portfolio. Elena felt something soften in her chest. "I'll have what you're having." He ordered 2 black coffees, which made Ruth raise an eyebrow but say nothing. When he returned to the table, he pushed 1 cup toward Elena. "Not lavender?" she asked. "You don't strike me as a lavender latte person." His eyes held hers. "You strike me as someone who's forgotten what she actually likes because no one's asked in a long time." The observation landed like an arrow, precise and devastating. Elena wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, needing something to hold. "Why did you arrange the business meeting?" "Really? Honestly?" Damien leaned back, studying her. "Because I needed a legitimate reason to be near you. And because I wanted to see how he treats you when he thinks no one's watching. And it's worse than I thought." His voice was quiet but edged with anger. "He doesn't see you, Elena. He sees a convenience. A social accessory. Someone to fill a role in his perfect life. You don't know him. I know men like him." Damien's jaw tightened. "I've done business with hundreds of them. They collect things, cars, homes, wives. And they value them exactly as long as they're useful. The moment you want something for yourself, you become a problem to be managed." Elena's throat constricted. "That's not fair. Isn't it?" He leaned forward. "When was the last time he asked about your day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time he touched you without it being performative? A hand on your back for a photo, an arm around your waist when someone's watching? When was the last time he looked at you the way I'm looking at you right now?" "Stop," Elena whispered. But she didn't look away. "I can't." Damien's voice roughened. "Because someone needs to tell you the truth, and clearly, no one in your life is willing to do it." Silence fell between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Outside the window, the city moved on, people walking dogs, couples holding hands, strangers living their ordinary lives. Elena took a sip of coffee. It was strong and bitter and real. "Why do you care?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. We've spoken maybe 3 times. Why does this matter to you?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his own cup. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than she'd ever heard it. 6 years ago, I was engaged." Elena's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Her name was Vanessa. He stared into his coffee like it held memories. "We met at a fundraiser, similar to the Harrington Gala, actually. She was beautiful, charming, said all the right things. I thought I'd found someone who saw past the money to the man underneath. What happened? I came home early from a business trip." His voice was flat now, emotionless in the way of people recounting traumas they've told themselves don't hurt anymore. "Found her in our bed with my former business partner. They'd been together for 8 months. The entire time we were planning our wedding. Damien, the worst part wasn't the cheating." He looked up, and Elena saw old pain in his eyes. It was realizing she'd never seen me at all. I was a bank account, a status symbol, a means to the lifestyle she wanted. When she apologized, and she did very eloquently, she actually said, "You were never really here anyway. You're always working. What did you expect?" Elena's hand moved across the table before she could stop herself, covering his. "That's not your fault. Isn't it?" His fingers curled around hers, holding on like she was an anchor. "I built walls after that. Decided feeling nothing was safer than risking that kind of betrayal again. I threw myself into work, into building an empire, into being exactly what Vanessa accused me of, a man who was never really there. You're here now, Elena said softly. Because of you. His thumb traced small circles on her palm, the touch innocent and incendiary all at once. When I saw you at that gala, in that red dress, looking so achingly alone in a crowded room, Elena, I saw myself. I saw what I'd been for 6 years. Someone going through the motions of a perfect life while slowly dying inside. Tears burned in Elena's eyes. I'm not dying. Aren't you? His voice was gentle, not accusatory. You gave up teaching for a man who doesn't value your education. You wear clothes that make you invisible because being seen feels dangerous. You've learned to take up as little space as possible. That's not living, Elena. That's surviving. She pulled her hand back, needing distance from the truth he was forcing her to see. Why are you telling me this? Your story, your past, why does it matter? Because I need you to understand something. Damien's eyes held hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. I'm not trying to be your savior. I'm not trying to rescue you from your marriage or offer you some fantasy escape. I'm a broken man who built a fortress to keep people out, and somehow you walked right through the walls like they weren't even there. That's not fair to me, Elena said, her voice cracking. You can't put that on me. I didn't ask to be your reminder that you're human. You're right. He sat back, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You're absolutely right. This isn't fair. None of this is fair. You're married. I'm emotionally unavailable. We barely know each other. Every rational thought tells me to walk away. Then why don't you? Because when I'm with you, I remember what hope feels like. The confession seemed to cost him something. And I haven't felt that in 6 years. Elena's chest ached. This was dangerous territory. Not because they'd crossed any physical lines, but because the emotional intimacy between them was more real than anything she'd experienced in her marriage. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. Tell me something real first, Damien said. Something you haven't told anyone. Something that's just yours. Elena stared at him, at this man who'd exploded into her life and cracked open all the places she'd kept sealed. Against every bit of better judgment, she found herself speaking. Sometimes I stand in my closet and look at that red dress, she whispered. And I remember what it felt like when you looked at me. Like I was real. Like I mattered. And then I hate myself for it, because I'm not supposed to need that from anyone but my husband. But Adrian hasn't looked at me, really looked at me, in years. And I've been so lonely, Damien. So desperately lonely in a marriage that looks perfect from the outside. Her voice broke on the last word. A tear slid down her cheek. Damien reached across the table and caught it with his thumb, the gesture so tender it shattered something in her chest. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. Even if this, whatever this is, never goes further than coffee and conversation, I want you to know you exist. You matter. And someone sees you. Elena closed her eyes, letting herself feel it for just a moment, the staggering relief of being witnessed, of having someone care enough to push past her polite deflections to the truth underneath. When she opened her eyes, Damien was still there, still looking at her with that devastating combination of desire and understanding. What do we do now? She asked. I don't know. His honesty was refreshing in its rawness. I've never been in this situation. I've never wanted someone I couldn't have. I've never met someone who made me want to tear down my own walls. We should stop this, Elena said, even as everything in her screamed to do the opposite. Before it goes too far. Has it not already? Damien asked softly. Elena, I think about you constantly. I arranged a business deal I don't need because the thought of not seeing you was unbearable. I'm sitting in a coffee shop telling you things I haven't told anyone because somehow you feel safe. How much further can it go? She didn't have an answer. They sat in silence, their coffee growing cold, the cafe's ambient noise washing over them. Two people who'd found something rare and terrifying and impossible. I need to ask you something, Damien said finally. And I need you to be honest. Okay. Are you happy? In your marriage, in your life, are you happy? Elena opened her mouth to give the automatic answer. Yes, of course, Adrian's wonderful, we're fine. The lie she'd been telling herself and everyone else for years. But sitting across from a man who'd trusted her with his own broken places, she couldn't do it. No, she whispered. I haven't been happy in a long time. I don't even remember what happy feels like anymore. Damien's expression shifted, something that looked like grief and relief tangled together. Thank you for saying that. Why? Because now I know I'm not imagining what I see when I look at you." He stood, pulling out his wallet and leaving cash on the table. Far more than 2 coffees cost. "Come on. I want to show you something. Damien, trust me. Please." Elena knew she should say no. Knew she should go home, return to her safe, suffocating life, and forget this man who made her feel too much. Instead, she stood and followed him out into the autumn afternoon. He led her 3 blocks to a small bookstore she'd never noticed, the kind with narrow aisles and towers of books stacked on every surface. The elderly owner looked up from behind the counter, recognized Damien, and smiled. "Back again, Mr. Stone? Can't stay away from the Brontes." "Not today, Margaret." Damien guided Elena toward a section in the back. "I'm playing tour guide." The section was labeled Classic Literature. Elena's breath caught. "When you said you wanted to teach literature," Damien said quietly, running his fingers along the spines, "what was your area?" 19th century British novels, Elena admitted. Austen, the Brontes, Eliot. He pulled a worn copy of Jane Eyre from the shelf and handed it to her. "Read me your favorite passage." "What?" "Humor me." His eyes were warm, encouraging. "Please." Elena opened the book, her hands trembling slightly. She knew the passage by heart, had memorized it years ago when she still believed in love that transformed. She found the page and read softly. "I would always rather be happy than dignified." Her voice caught on the words. Because wasn't that exactly what she'd been doing? Choosing dignity, the appearance of a perfect marriage, over happiness? "Do you believe that?" Damien asked. "Or did you once believe it?" Elena closed the book, holding it against her chest. "I used to believe it. Before I learned that sometimes happiness isn't a choice you get to make. But it is a choice, Elena." He took the book gently from her hands and set it aside, then took both her hands in his. "Maybe not an easy one, maybe not a safe one, but it's still a choice. You're asking me to blow up my life. I'm not asking you to do anything." His grip tightened. "I'm just reminding you that you have a choice. You always have a choice. You can stay in a marriage that makes you invisible, or you can choose yourself. And Elena," his voice dropped, became urgent. "Whether you choose me or not, please choose yourself. Please don't disappear completely." Elena looked up at him, at this man who barely knew her, but somehow saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. And she realized something terrifying. She was falling in love with him. Not the safe, gentle love of fairy tales, but the dangerous, devastating love that changes everything. The kind of love that demands you be brave enough to choose yourself first. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." He lifted one hand to her face, cupping her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. "But I'd rather be scared and real than safe and empty." They stood there in the bookstore, surrounded by stories of love and courage and transformation, and Elena felt the last of her armor crack open. She didn't kiss him, didn't cross that line, but she leaned into his touch, closed her eyes, and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like to choose happiness over dignity. To choose herself. To choose this. The coffee meetings became a pattern. Elena told herself they were innocent, just conversations, just friendship, just 2 lonely people finding solace in being seen. She told herself the guilt gnawing at her chest was unnecessary because they hadn't done anything wrong. But she knew the truth. Emotional infidelity was still infidelity. And what she had with Damien felt more real than anything she'd shared with Adrian in years. It started with coffee at Brew and Page's on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the days Adrian worked late at the office. Then it expanded to walks through the botanical gardens on Wednesday afternoons. Then lunches at quiet restaurants where no one from their social circles would think to look. They never touched beyond the occasional brush of hands. Never kissed. Never crossed the physical line that would make the betrayal undeniable. But they talked. God, they talked. Elena told him about her childhood in Ohio, about a father who'd believed daughters should be educated and strong, about losing him to cancer when she was 23 and feeling like she'd lost her compass, about meeting Adrian at a mutual friend's wedding when she was 25 and grieving, how his confidence had felt like safety, how she'd married him thinking stability was the same as love. Damien told her about growing up in foster care after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. About being shuffled between 6 different homes before he aged out at 18. About putting himself through community college, then university, then business school through a combination of scholarships, loans, and working 3 jobs. About building his empire from nothing because he never wanted to be powerless again. That's why Vanessa hurt so much. he admitted during one of their garden walks, the October air crisp with the promise of winter. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was realizing that even with all my money, all my success, I was still that powerless kid who nobody wanted. Elena stopped walking, turning to face him on the path lined with rust-colored leaves. I want you. The words hung between them, raw and dangerous. Damien's eyes darkened. Elena, I don't mean. She pressed her hands to her face, flustered. I just mean you're not unwanted. You're not powerless. And what she did to you says everything about her and nothing about your worth. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. You're making it very hard for me to be noble about this situation. Maybe I don't want you to be noble. Yes, you do. His voice was gentle but firm. Because you're not the kind of person who could live with crossing that line while still married. It would destroy you, Elena. And I care about you too much to be part of that destruction. She knew he was right. Hated that he was right. So what are we doing? She asked, her voice small. What is this? I don't know. Damien shoved his hands in his pockets. A gesture she'd learned meant he was struggling with self-control. I keep telling myself I should end this. That I should stop seeing you, stop texting you, stop counting the hours until Tuesday. But then Tuesday comes, and you walk into that cafe, and I remember what breathing feels like. Elena's chest ached. I think about you all the time. Even when I'm home, even when Adrian's there, you're what I think about. And I feel so guilty, but not guilty enough to stop. Do you love him? The question was quiet, almost afraid. Your husband, do you still love him? Elena considered lying. Considered the easy answer that would make this less complicated. But she'd promised herself honesty with Damien, even when it hurt. I don't know if I ever did, she admitted. Or maybe I loved who I thought he was. The man who seemed confident and protective when I was grieving my father. But the real Adrian, the one who dismisses me and interrupts me and treats me like a convenience, I don't love him. I don't even like him anymore. Then why stay? Fear. The word tasted like ash. Fear of being alone. Fear of proving that everyone who said I was lucky to marry him was right, that I'm not enough on my own. Fear that if I leave, I'll discover I'm exactly what Adrian thinks I am. Nothing without him. Damien's hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped her face with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. Elena, listen to me. You are brilliant. You are kind. You have a master's degree you never got to use because someone convinced you his dreams mattered more than yours. You light up when you talk about literature the way most people never light up about anything. And every Tuesday and Thursday, I watch you walk into that cafe, and I think, there's the bravest person I know, choosing to show up even when it's terrifying. A tear slid down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. You're not nothing, he continued, his voice fierce. You're everything. And the tragedy is that your husband is too blind to see it. Elena leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. What are we going to do, Damien? I don't know. His forehead rested against hers, close, intimate, but not a kiss. But I know I'm not ready to stop seeing you. Not yet. Me neither. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, existing in the fragile space between what was and what could be. Then Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. Reality intruding. She pulled it out, already knowing who it was. Asterisk Adrian. Where are you? Need you to pick up my dry cleaning. Also, we have the Fitzgerald dinner tonight, don't forget. Asterisk. Not how are you, not I miss you, just tasks. Obligations. Reminders of the role she was expected to play. Damien saw her expression change. He doesn't deserve you. Maybe I don't deserve better. Elena pocketed her phone. Don't. Damien's voice went sharp. Don't do that. Don't make his failure to value you into evidence of your unworthiness. That's what he wants you to believe. That's how he keeps you small. Elena looked up at him, at this man who'd somehow become her lifeline in just 3 weeks. When did you get so wise about toxic relationships? When I spent 6 years in one with myself. He smiled sadly. I told myself I deserved to be alone after Vanessa, that I wasn't worthy of love. It took meeting you to realize I'd been punishing myself for someone else's betrayal. And now I'm terrified. His honesty was devastating. Because I'm falling for a woman I can't have, and I don't know how to stop. Falling for. The words echoed in Elena's chest. Damien. I know. He stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. You're married. This can't go anywhere. I know all the logical reasons this is a terrible idea. But logic doesn't seem to matter when it comes to you. Elena's phone buzzed again. Adrian, growing impatient. I have to go, she said, hating every word. I know. But neither of them moved. Finally, Elena forced herself to take a step back, then another. Same time Thursday. I'll be there. It sounded like a vow. Elena walked away, feeling his eyes on her until she turned the corner. When she got to her car, she sat in the driver's seat for 10 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to remember how to be the person Adrian expected her to be. The wife who didn't think about another man. The wife who didn't feel more alive during stolen coffee dates than in her own marriage. The wife who wasn't falling in love with someone who saw her. But that woman was becoming harder and harder to find. The weeks blurred together in a strange dichotomy. There was her life with Adrian, sterile, performative, a play where she knew her lines by heart. She attended dinners and smiled at his colleagues. She picked up his dry cleaning and managed the household. She slept in a separate bedroom and told herself it was because of his snoring, when really it was because his touch, rare as it was, felt like a stranger's. Then there was her life with Damien, vibrant, terrifying, alive. They met in secret corners of the city. They shared books and stories and silences that felt full rather than empty. He made her laugh. Actually laugh, the kind that came from her belly and left her breathless. One Thursday, he took her to a used bookstore in the warehouse district. I want to buy you something, he said, gesturing to the towering shelves. You can't buy me things. Elena looked around nervously, as if Adrian might materialize from between the stacks. It's a book, not a diamond necklace. Damien's eyes twinkled with amusement. Though if you'd let me buy you a diamond necklace. Damien. I'm kidding. He steered her toward the literature section. Mostly. Pick something. Anything. Something that makes you feel like yourself. Elena ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of the invitation. When was the last time someone had asked what she wanted? She pulled out a leather-bound edition of Middlemarch by George Eliot. The pages were soft with age, the cover worn smooth by countless hands. This one, she said softly. Damien took it, flipping to a random page. It is never too late to be what you might have been, he read, then looked at her with such intensity it hurt. Is that why you chose it? Maybe. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Or maybe I just like the story. He bought the book along with a first edition poetry collection for himself. Mary Oliver, he said, because her poems reminded him that beauty still existed even after loss. They sat in a cafe across the street, books open but mostly forgotten, talking about everything and nothing. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Elena said, stirring sugar into her tea. Damien was quiet for a moment. Sometimes I go to my penthouse and I'm surrounded by everything I've built, the success, the luxury, the proof that I made it, and I feel absolutely nothing. Like I'm standing in someone else's life. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. You're not alone in that feeling. I know. His fingers threaded through hers. That's why I can't stay away from you. You make me feel real again. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep in Elena's chest. We're a mess, aren't we? Two broken people clinging to each other like life rafts. Maybe. Damien smiled, and it transformed his face, softened the sharp edges, lit up his eyes. Or maybe we're two people who remind each other what it's like to be whole. They stayed until the cafe closed, talking until their voices were hoarse, and the barista was pointedly stacking chairs. Outside, under the streetlights, Damien pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they'd embraced. Elena's breath caught as his arms wrapped around her, strong and sure. She pressed her face into his chest, inhaling the scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. I don't want to let you go, he murmured into her hair. Then don't. Elena's arms tightened around his waist. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the middle of a quiet street, knowing they were crossing lines even as they told themselves it was innocent. When they finally pulled apart, Damien cupped her face in both hands. Elena, don't say it. She pressed her fingers to his lips. Whatever you're about to say, don't. Not yet. Let me have this, these moments with you, without making it more complicated. It's already complicated. I know. Tears pricked her eyes. But I'm not ready to face what that means. He kissed her forehead. Just that, nothing more, but the tenderness of it broke something loose in her chest. Thursday, he asked. Thursday, she confirmed. She drove home with the book on the passenger seat, George Eliot's words echoing in her mind. It is never too late to be what you might have been. When she arrived at the penthouse, Adrian was in his study, on a conference call with Tokyo. He didn't look up when she passed his door. She went to her bedroom, her separate, lonely bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed with the book in her lap. Her phone buzzed. A text from Damien. Asterisk, thank you for today. For every day. For reminding me I'm capable of feeling. Asterisk. She typed back. Asterisk, thank you for seeing me. Even when I couldn't see myself. Asterisk. Then another text. Asterisk, one more thing. That George Eliot quote? I believe it about you. It's not too late, Elena. Whatever you want to be, whoever you want to be, it's not too late. Asterisk. Elena pressed the phone to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Because she was starting to believe him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The following Tuesday, Damien wasn't at the cafe. Elena waited for 20 minutes, checking her phone obsessively, worry gnawing at her stomach. He always texted if he was running late. Always. Finally, a message came through. Asterisk, I'm sorry. Emergency with a property development. Can we reschedule? Asterisk. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by how pathetic that relief was. She was a married woman devastated that her secret not-quite affair was being postponed. Of course, she typed back. Hope everything's okay. Asterisk, it will be. I miss you already. Asterisk. Elena stared at those 4 words. I miss you already. When was the last time Adrian had said he missed her? She couldn't remember. Maybe never. She ordered coffee anyway, sat in their usual corner, and opened the Middlemarch book. But the words blurred on the page. Because she realized something sitting there alone in their cafe. These secret meetings, these stolen moments, this connection that felt more real than her marriage, couldn't last. Eventually, she would have to choose. Stay in the safe, suffocating marriage where she was invisible but secure. Or risk everything for the possibility of being seen. The thought terrified her. But so did the alternative. Spending the rest of her life as a ghost, haunting the edges of her own existence. Elena closed the book and stared out the window at people passing by, all of them living their real, messy, complicated lives. And she made a decision. Not today. Not yet. But soon, she would have to be brave. Soon, she would have to choose herself. The text came on a Wednesday morning. Elena was in the kitchen, making coffee Adrian wouldn't thank her for, when her phone lit up with Damien's name. Asterisk, can we meet today instead of tomorrow? I need to see you. Asterisk. Something in the urgency of it made her chest tighten. Is everything okay? Asterisk, no. But it will be if I can see you. Please, asterisk. She should have said no. Should have stuck to their careful schedule, their rules, their illusion that what they were doing was somehow contained and manageable. But Damien needed her. And God help her, she needed to be needed. Asterisk, brew and pages? 11 am, asterisk. Asterisk, thank you. Elena, thank you, asterisk. She told herself it was fine. Adrian was at the office. He wouldn't know. He never knew. She dressed carefully in jeans and a cream sweater. The kind of outfit that said she was just running errands, nothing significant, certainly not meeting a man who'd become her reason for breathing. The cafe was quieter than usual, the mid-morning lull between breakfast and lunch rushes. Damien was already there, sitting in their corner, but something was different. His shoulders were tense. His jaw was tight. When he looked up and saw her, the raw need in his expression stopped her in her tracks. What happened? Elena slid into the chair across from him, instinctively reaching for his hand. He gripped her fingers like a drowning man. My brother called this morning. Ryan, he's getting married. Elena waited, sensing there was more. He told me he was terrified, Damien continued, his voice rough. That he almost called it off because the idea of being vulnerable with someone, of giving them the power to destroy him, it was paralyzing. But then he said something that broke me. What? He said, but living without her would be worse than any pain she could cause. And I realized, life's too short to choose fear over love. Damien's eyes found hers, dark and intense. Elena, I can't do this anymore. Her heart stopped. Can't do what? This. He gestured between them. These careful meetings where we pretend we're just friends. These conversations where we talk about everything except what we both know is true. I can't keep seeing you and not. His voice cracked. I'm in love with you. The words landed like an earthquake. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her, felt everything she'd been carefully balancing come crashing down. Damien. I know. He pressed his palms to his eyes. I know you're married. I know this is impossible. I know I have no right to tell you this. But my brother's getting married, and all I could think was, asterisk, he's braver than me. He's choosing love, even though it's terrifying. And I'm sitting here falling apart over a woman I'm too much of a coward to fight for. Asterisk. You're not a coward, Elena whispered. Then what am I? He dropped his hands, and the anguish in his face was unbearable. Because I love you, Elena. I love the way you light up when you talk about books. I love how you take your coffee black because you forgot what you actually like. I love that you're kind even when the world hasn't been kind to you. I love you, and I don't know what to do with it. Tears streamed down Elena's face. I love you too. The confession hung between them, beautiful and terrible and irrevocable. God, Damien breathed. Say it again. I love you. The words felt like breaking open, like finally telling the truth after years of lies. I love you, and it's destroying me because I don't know how to choose between the life I have and the life I want. He stood abruptly, pulling her up with him, and then his hands were framing her face, and his forehead was pressed to hers. Leave him, Damien said urgently. Elena, leave him. I know it's terrifying, I know it's complicated, but please, choose yourself. Choose us. Choose the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to be happy. I'm scared. I'm terrified. His breath was warm against her lips, close enough to kiss, but not crossing that final line. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Elena's hands gripped his shirt, anchoring herself to him. What if I'm not brave enough? You are. You've been brave every day you've survived in a marriage that was killing you. You were brave when you wore that red dress. You were brave when you met me here the first time. Elena, you're the bravest person I know. She was about to respond, about to say yes or no or something, when the cafe door chimed, and Adrian walked in. Time slowed. Elena saw it happen in fragments, Adrian's eyes scanning the cafe, landing on them. His expression shifting from confusion to shock to something darker. The way people at nearby tables suddenly became very interested in their coffee cups. Elena and Damien sprang apart, but the damage was done. They'd been standing too close, their body language too intimate, the tears on Elena's face too telling. Elena. Adrian's voice was cold, controlled. What the hell is this? Adrian, her mind went blank. How did you explain the unexplainable? Adrian's eyes moved to Damien, recognition dawning. Stone. You're Stone. The investor. His laugh was bitter, sharp. Of course. I should have known. This isn't what you think, Elena started, even though it was exactly what he thought. Really? Adrian's voice rose. Other patrons were definitely staring now. Because it looks like my wife is having a cozy morning with the billionaire she's been eye-fucking since the Harrington Gala. Elena flinched at the crudeness. Beside her, Damien tensed. Watch your mouth, Damien said quietly, but with steel underneath. Watch my mouth. Adrian laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. You're screwing my wife, and you're telling me to watch my mouth? We haven't. Elena's voice was shaking. Adrian, we haven't done anything. Oh, please. Adrian's face was flushed now, anger making him reckless. You think I'm stupid? You think I haven't noticed you disappearing every Tuesday and Thursday? Your errands that take 3 hours? The way you look at your phone and smile like some lovesick teenager. Elena's stomach dropped. He'd known. Or suspected. And he'd said nothing. You knew, she whispered. I had suspicions. Adrian's eyes were cold. But I figured as long as you were discreet, as long as you didn't embarrass me publicly, I could overlook it. Clearly, I gave you too much credit. The words hit Elena like a slap. You would have overlooked it? Your wife having. She couldn't even say the word affair because it wasn't what this was. You would have overlooked that? As long as it stayed private. Adrian shrugged, a gesture that was somehow more devastating than his anger. You think you're the first bored housewife to need attention? I didn't care what you did in your spare time as long as you showed up when I needed you to. The casual cruelty of it stole Elena's breath. Damien took a step forward, his entire body radiating controlled fury. That's how you talk to your wife? Like she's an employee. Stay out of this, Stone. Adrian's eyes narrowed. You're a complication, not a solution. Elena knows which side her bread is buttered on. She's not going anywhere. Actually, Elena's voice came out stronger than she felt. You don't get to speak for me. Both men looked at her. She stood there in the cafe that had become her sanctuary, tears on her face, her heart hammering, and felt something shift inside her. Some final piece clicking into place. You're right, Adrian, she said quietly. I have been meeting Damien, but not for the reasons you think. We've been meeting because he's the first person in years who's treated me like I matter, who asks about my day and actually listens to the answer, who values my thoughts and doesn't interrupt me mid-sentence. Elena, Adrian's tone held a warning. I'm not finished. She was shaking, but she kept going. You asked if I know which side my bread is buttered on. You're right, I do. I'm on the side where I'm a person, not a prop. Where I'm seen, not ignored. Where I'm valued, not tolerated. You're being dramatic, Adrian said dismissively. Let's go home and discuss this privately. No. The word hung in the air. No. Adrian repeated, as if he'd never heard her refuse him before. Maybe he hadn't. I'm not going home with you. Elena's voice was steadier now. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. I need time to think. Think about what? Your responsibilities? Your marriage vows. Adrian's face was darkening. You don't get to just walk away, Elena. That's not how this works. Actually, Damien said quietly, she can walk away whenever she wants. That's exactly how it works. Adrian whirled on him. This is your fault. You manipulated her, used business as an excuse to. I fell in love with her. Damien's voice was calm but absolute. I fell in love with a woman who was drowning in a marriage where she didn't matter. I fell in love with someone brilliant and kind and brave, who'd been told for so long that she was nothing without you that she started to believe it. So yes, I pursued her. Yes, I found reasons to be near her. But I never manipulated her. I saw her. And apparently, that was enough to threaten everything you'd built. You pretentious, Adrian started forward. Stop. Elena stepped between them, hands raised. Both of you stop. She looked at Adrian, really looked at him for the first time in years, and saw what she should have seen long ago. A man who'd never loved her, not really. Who'd loved having a wife, loved the image of a perfect marriage, loved the convenience of someone to manage his life. But he'd never loved her. When was the last time you asked me if I was happy? Elena asked quietly. Adrian blinked. What? When was the last time you asked if I was happy? Or what I wanted? Or what I dreamed about? Her voice was steady despite the tears. When was the last time you looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a person instead of an accessory? Elena, you're being ridiculous. I'm not. She wiped her eyes. I'm being honest. For the first time in our entire marriage, I'm being completely honest. I'm not happy, Adrian. I haven't been happy in years. And you've never once asked why. Because you had everything. Adrian's control was slipping. A beautiful home, financial security, a husband who provided for you. What more did you want? I wanted to matter. Elena's voice broke. I wanted to be more than your plus one. I wanted you to remember I existed when I wasn't actively useful to you. I wanted what every person deserves, to be loved not for what I could do for you, but for who I am. And he gives you that. Adrian jerked his head toward Damien. A man you've known for what, a few weeks? You're going to throw away 7 years for some fantasy. Elena looked at Damien, at the man who'd cracked her open and reminded her she was worth loving, who'd shared his own broken places and trusted her to be gentle with them, who'd asked what she wanted and actually cared about the answer. Maybe it is a fantasy, she said softly. Maybe Damien and I won't work out. Maybe I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But at least it will be my mistake. My choice. My life. She turned back to Adrian. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll come get my things. And then I think we need to talk to lawyers. The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the cafe. Adrian's face went through several expressions, shock, anger, disbelief, before settling on cold fury. You're serious? Yes. You'll regret this. His voice was hard. You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've given up. The money, the lifestyle, the security. I don't want your money. Elena felt strangely calm now that the decision was made. I want my life back. The one I gave up trying to be good enough for you. Adrian looked at Damien. Congratulations, Stone. You can have her. But when you get bored, and you will, remember that I warned you. She's nothing special. You're wrong, Damien said quietly. She's everything. Adrian's laugh was cruel. We'll see how long that lasts. He turned and walked out, letting the door slam behind him. Silence fell over the cafe. Elena became suddenly, acutely aware of the dozen pairs of eyes watching them. Her face burned with humiliation. Elena, Damien's hand touched her shoulder gently. I need air, she whispered. I can't breathe. She rushed toward the door, pushing outside into the cool November air. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were shaking. The reality of what she'd just done crashed over her in waves. She'd left her husband. In public. For another man. 7 years of marriage. Gone in a conversation that lasted less than 10 minutes. Elena. Damien was beside her, his voice urgent. Elena, look at me. She turned, and the concern in his face broke something in her chest. I destroyed my marriage, she said, the words coming out in gasps. I destroyed it in a cafe in front of strangers and, oh God, what did I just do? You chose yourself. Damien pulled her into his arms, holding her while she shook. You chose yourself, and that took more courage than anything else. Except you couldn't start fresh by erasing yourself. She understood that now. She fell asleep sometime after 2, exhausted from crying and thinking and feeling too much all at once. The next morning, Elena woke to pale sunlight filtering through hotel curtains and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where she was. Then she remembered. Everything. Her phone showed missed calls from Marjorie Pemberton and 2 other wives from their social circle. The gossip network had clearly been activated. By tonight, everyone in their world would know. Elena Winters had left her husband. In a coffee shop. For Damien Stone. The humiliation should have crushed her. Instead, she felt strangely light. She made coffee with the in-room machine, terrible coffee, nothing like what Ruth made it brew in pages, and sat by the window watching the city wake up. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. Asterisk Elena, this is Ryan Stone. Damien's brother. He gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to say, whatever you're going through, whatever you decide, you're braver than you know. Also, my brother is a mess. Just FYI. Ryan asterisk. Despite everything, Elena smiled. Then she texted back, asterisk thank you. Tell him I'm okay. I just need time, asterisk. Asterisk will do. Also, he's in love with you. Like disgustingly, write bad poetry in love with you. Thought you should know, asterisk. Elena's chest ached with something that was equal parts joy and terror. She needed to go to the penthouse. Get her things. Face whatever came next. But first, she needed to do something she should have done years ago. The public library was 3 blocks from the hotel. Elena walked there in yesterday's clothes, drawing curious looks from the morning commuters in their pressed suits and purpose-filled strides. She found a computer in the research section and opened a blank document. Then she started writing. Not a plan. Not a list. Just words. Thoughts. The story of a woman who'd disappeared so slowly she hadn't noticed until someone reminded her she existed. She wrote about her father, who'd taught her that being smart was better than being pretty, that having opinions was more important than being agreeable. She wrote about meeting Adrian and mistaking his confidence for strength. She wrote about the slow erosion of self that happened when you spent 7 years trying to be what someone else needed instead of who you were. And she wrote about Damien. About a man who'd looked at her in a red dress and seen not an object to possess, but a person to know. About falling in love in coffee shops and bookstores. About conversations that felt more intimate than anything physical. She wrote for 2 hours straight, her fingers flying over the keys, until her wrists ached and tears blurred her vision. When she finished, she read it back. It wasn't polished. It wasn't even particularly good. But it was true. And truth, she was learning, was more valuable than perfection. She saved the document to a flash drive she bought from the library's gift shop. Titled it simply, Elena. Then she walked back to the hotel, showered, put on fresh clothes from her overnight bag, and called a car to take her to the penthouse. The penthouse felt different in the harsh afternoon light, less like a home and more like a museum. Elena walked through rooms she'd cleaned and decorated and lived in, and felt like a stranger. Adrian wasn't there. She was grateful for that small mercy. She packed efficiently, clothes, toiletries, the books she'd collected over the years. Her laptop, the few photos she had of her father. The red dress, because whatever happened next, she wanted to remember the woman who'd been brave enough to wear it. She left behind the jewelry Adrian had given her. The designer handbags. The expensive shoes that pinched her feet. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Asterisk Adrian. I've taken only what's mine. We can work out the details through lawyers. I don't want your money or the penthouse or anything else. I just want a divorce. I hope someday you find someone you actually love. Someone you see as a person, not an accessory. I hope you learn to ask people if they're happy. Elena asterisk. She stood in the living room one last time, this pristine space that had never felt like home and felt nothing but relief. Then she left, closing the door on 7 years of her life. Elena checked into a small apartment she found on a month-to-month lease. Nothing fancy, just a studio in a converted warehouse building with exposed brick and windows that actually opened. It cost half what the hotel did and felt more like home than the penthouse ever had. She spent the evening unpacking, arranging her books on makeshift shelves, hanging the red dress in the tiny closet. Her phone stayed silent. She'd turned off notifications from everyone except a few key numbers. At 8 o'clock, there was a knock at her door. Her heart jumped. Was it Adrian? Damien? She checked the peephole. Damien stood in the hallway, holding a paper bag and looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen him. Elena opened the door. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi. I brought Chinese food." He lifted the bag. "I figured you probably haven't eaten. And before you ask, Ryan gave me your address. He said you'd texted. I hope it's okay that I came." Elena stepped aside, letting him in. He set the bag on her tiny kitchen counter, then turned to face her, hands in his pockets. That gesture she'd learned meant he was trying not to reach for her. "I'm not here to pressure you," Damien said. "I'm not here to ask where we stand or what happens next. I needed to see you. To know you were okay." "I'm okay." Elena's voice was hoarse from crying. "I'm terrified and confused and I have no idea what I'm doing with my life, but I'm okay." "You left him." "I did. How do you feel?" It was such a simple question. When was the last time Adrian had asked how she felt? "Free," Elena whispered, "and guilty for feeling free, and scared that I made a huge mistake, and relieved that it's over." And her voice cracked. "I feel like I can finally breathe." Damien crossed the small space between them and pulled her into his arms. Elena melted into him, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I'm so proud of you," he murmured into her hair. "What you did, walking away from security, from everything you knew, Elena, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." "I'm not brave," she said against his chest. "I'm a mess." "You're both." She felt him smile. "Bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do it anyway." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in her tiny new apartment that smelled like fresh paint and possibilities. Finally, Elena pulled back enough to look up at him. "I need to tell you something." "Okay. I love you." The words came easier this time. "I love you, Damien. But I can't jump from one relationship into another. I need time to figure out who I am without a husband, without being defined by someone else. Does that make sense?" Something flickered in his expression, disappointment maybe or pain, but he nodded. "It makes perfect sense. So I need you to be patient with me." Her hands fisted in his shirt. "I need you to let me be alone for a while. To let me figure out my own life before I try to figure out in us. Can you do that?" Damien cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Elena, I waited 6 years to feel anything after Vanessa. I built walls and convinced myself I was better off alone. Then you walked into that gala in a red dress and reminded me I was still human. I can wait as long as you need. Days, weeks, months, whatever it takes. Because when you're ready, I'll be here. What if I'm never ready?" The fear escaped before she could stop it. "What if I'm too broken? What if? Then I'll still be here." His voice was fierce. "Not waiting for you to be with me, but just here. As your friend, as someone who sees you, as whatever you need me to be. Because Elena, you're not a project to be fixed or a prize to be won. You're a person I love. And loving you means supporting whatever you need to do to heal." Elena's breath hitched. "How are you real?" "I'm not perfect." A sad smile touched his lips. "I'm demanding and controlling, and I've spent 6 years avoiding real connection. But you make me want to be better. You make me want to tear down my walls and risk getting hurt. You make me want to be the man who deserves you." "You already are," Elena whispered. "Not yet." He kissed her forehead, soft, reverent. "But I'm working on it." They ate Chinese food sitting on her floor, since she didn't have furniture yet. They talked about nothing important, the apartment, the city, movies they'd seen. They carefully avoided the topics that were too big. Divorce lawyers, the future, what came next. At 10 o'clock, Damien stood to leave. "Thank you for coming," Elena said at the door. "Thank you for letting me." He hesitated then. "Can I ask one thing?" "Anything. When you're ready, when you've figured out who Elena is without anyone else, will you tell me? Because I'd really like to know her." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I promise." He left, and she locked the door behind him, then slid down to sit with her back against it. She'd walked away from her marriage. She'd told the man she loved that she needed space. She had no job, no plan, and a studio apartment with no furniture. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt like herself. The next morning, Elena woke early and did something she hadn't done since grad school. She applied for teaching positions. Not at prestigious universities or elite prep schools, at community colleges and public schools where the pay was modest and the work was hard but real. She updated her resume, dusted off her master's thesis, and wrote cover letters that were honest about the gap in her employment. *, I took time away from my career to support my husband's work. I'm ready now to reclaim my own path. *. She hit send on 17 applications. Then she opened her laptop and found the document she'd written in the library. Elena. She read it again, this time not crying but nodding, recognizing herself in the words. And she started writing a new document. This one was titled, What I Want. She wrote, to teach, to have conversations that matter, to wear colors that aren't beige, to laugh until my stomach hurts, to be alone without being lonely, to eventually, when I'm ready, love someone who loves me back, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to remember that I'm enough. She read it over, added one more line, to be brave enough to choose myself every single day. She saved it, printed it, hung it on the bare wall next to the red dress. Then Elena Reyes, not Elena Winters, not anybody's wife, just Elena, made herself terrible instant coffee and stood at her window watching the city wake up. And for the first time in years, she felt like the protagonist of her own story. Not the supporting character in someone else's life. The main character in hers. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was hers. 3 months passed. Winter settled over the city like a benediction. Snow dusting the streets, holiday lights strung between buildings, the air sharp and clean with cold that made Elena feel awake. She got a job. Not at a prestigious university. Not even at a well-funded public school. But at Lincoln Community College, teaching introduction to literature to first-generation college students who worked 2 jobs and came to class exhausted but hungry to learn. Her first day, she stood in front of 23 students in a fluorescent-lit classroom that smelled like industrial cleaner and old books, and introduced herself. I'm Professor Reyes, she said, and the name felt like coming home. I'm here because I believe stories have the power to change lives. They changed mine. I hope they'll change yours too. One student, a woman in her 40s named Maria who worked nights at a hospital, raised her hand. Why'd you become a teacher? Elena could have given the professional answer, the polished one. Instead, she told the truth. Because for a long time, I forgot who I was. I let other people tell me what mattered, what I should want, who I should be. And then someone reminded me that I got to choose. That it wasn't too late to become who I might have been. She smiled. Literature did that for me. I'm hoping it might do the same for some of you. The students looked at her with something that might have been understanding, or recognition, or hope. Elena opened her worn copy of Jane Eyre and began to teach. She didn't see Damien. Not because he'd disappeared, but because she'd asked for space and he'd respected it. He texted occasionally, once every 2 weeks or so, just small things. Saw this poem and thought of you. Attached, Mary Oliver's Wild Geese. How's teaching going? Asterisk, no pressure to respond. Just thinking of you. Asterisk. Elena always responded, but kept it brief. She was learning how to be alone. How to come home to an empty apartment and feel peaceful instead of panicked. How to make decisions, small ones, like what to eat for dinner, and bigger ones, like turning down Adrian's lawyer's settlement offer that came with strings attached, without consulting anyone. The divorce was messy but progressing. Adrian had been vindictive at first, threatening to drag out proceedings, to make her pay for humiliating him. But his lawyer had apparently convinced him that a quick, clean divorce was better for his reputation than a drawn-out scandal. Elena asked for nothing. No alimony, no split of assets beyond what was legally hers. She just wanted out. Adrian's final text, before she blocked him completely. You'll regret this. But she didn't. She missed the security sometimes. Missed not worrying about money or having to budget for groceries. But she didn't miss Adrian. Didn't miss being invisible in her own home. Didn't miss the woman she'd become trying to please someone who would never be pleased. Elena started going to therapy. Dr. Patricia Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who specialized in helping people rebuild after narcissistic relationships. You weren't in a marriage, Dr. Morrison said during their third session. You were in a hostage situation. You just didn't realize you were allowed to leave. The words had stung. Then they'd set her free. December arrived, and with it, the end of her first semester teaching. Elena graded final papers in her apartment, which now had furniture, second-hand but comfortable, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Her students had grown. Maria, the hospital worker, had written a stunning analysis of Jane Eyre that made Elena cry. A 19-year-old named Jacob, who'd started the semester barely able to write a paragraph, had turned in an essay on the Great Gatsby that showed real critical thinking. She'd done that. Her teaching had helped them see things differently, think more deeply, believe in their own voices. On the last day of classes, Maria stayed after. Professor Reyes, I just wanted to say thank you. This class, it reminded me why I went back to school. You make us feel like our thoughts matter. Elena's throat tightened. They do matter. You matter. So do you, Maria said quietly. I hope you know that. After Maria left, Elena sat alone in the empty classroom and let herself cry. Not sad tears, grateful ones. She'd found her way back to herself. The text from Damien came on a Friday evening in mid-December. I know you asked for space. I've tried to respect that. But my brother's wedding is tomorrow, and I have a +1 I'm not using. No pressure. No expectations. But if you wanted to come, if you're ready, I'd really like you there. Elena stared at the message for a long time. 3 months. She'd spent 3 months learning how to be alone. Learning who Elena Reyes was without a husband, without someone else's dreams overshadowing her own. She'd rebuilt herself from the ground up, gotten a job she loved, made peace with her past, started therapy, learned that being alone didn't mean being lonely. She was ready. She typed back, "What time should I be ready?" His response came immediately. Really? Really. Send me the details. There was a long pause. Then, Elena, I've missed you so much. Her chest ached with how much she'd missed him too. Tomorrow. We'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow. Damien picked her up at 6 o'clock. Elena had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a deep emerald dress. Not as bold as the red one, but still vibrant, still her. She opened the door, and there he was. 3 months had changed him too. He looked softer somehow, less like a fortress, and more like a man who'd learned how to be vulnerable. His eyes met hers, and the emotion in them was almost overwhelming. "Hi," he said. "Hi." For a moment, they just looked at each other, really looked, drinking in the changes, the growth, the people they'd become in the time apart. "You look beautiful," Damien said finally. "But more than that, you look happy." "I am." Elena smiled. "I really am." "Good." His voice was rough with feeling. "That's all I wanted. For you to be happy. Even if it meant being without you?" Even then. He offered his arm. "Ready." Elena took it, and the simple contact sent warmth through her entire body. "Ready." The wedding was beautiful. Ryan Stone married a woman named Claire in a ceremony that was both elegant and emotional. When they exchanged vows, Claire's voice shook as she said, "I choose you. Every day, in every way, I choose you." Elena felt Damien's hand find hers in the darkened reception hall. She squeezed back. After the ceremony, during the reception, they danced. Not the stiff, performative dancing she'd done with Adrian at charity galas, but real dancing, swaying to slow music, Damien's arms around her waist, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tell me about teaching," he said softly. So she did. She told him about Maria and Jacob, about lesson plans and grading papers at midnight, about the moment when a student's face lit up because they finally understood a metaphor. "You're glowing when you talk about it," Damien observed. "Because I love it. Because it's mine. Because I finally feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm so proud of you." He pulled back enough to look at her. "These 3 months, I know you needed space, and I'm glad you took it. But Elena, watching you from a distance, seeing you build this life for yourself, it's been the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed." "It was hard," Elena admitted. "Some days I wanted to call you. Some days I was so lonely I could barely breathe. But I needed to prove to myself that I could do it, that I could be okay on my own. And are you? Okay on your own?" She thought about her little apartment, her students, the life she'd built from scratch. "Yes, I really am." "Good." Damien's thumb traced circles on her lower back. Because I don't want to be the reason you're okay. I want to be the person who gets to celebrate that you're okay. Does that make sense? Elena looked up at him. This man who'd exploded into her life, who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd respected her need for space even when it cost him. I love you, she said. Not desperate. Not needy. Just true. Damien's breath caught. Say it again. I love you, Damien Stone. I love you not because you saved me. You didn't. I saved myself. I love you because you reminded me I was worth saving. Because you see me. Because when I'm with you, I'm more myself, not less. Elena, his voice was wrecked. I'm ready, she continued. I'm ready to try this. Really try. Not as someone running from a bad marriage, but as someone who's built her own life and wants to share it with you. If you still want. He kissed her. Finally, after months of restraint, after all the almost kisses and careful distance, Damien kissed her. His lips were soft and sure against hers, his hands framing her face like she was something precious. Elena's arms wrapped around his neck, and she kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in for 3 months. It wasn't desperate or frantic. It was a homecoming, a recognition, a promise. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Damien pressed his forehead to hers. I never stopped wanting you, he said. Every single day, I wanted to show up at your apartment, to take you to dinner, to tell you I loved you. But I wanted you to choose yourself first, to know your own strength. I do now. Elena's hands cupped his face. And I'm choosing you too. If you'll have me. If I'll. Damien laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. Elena, I've been yours since the moment you walked into that gala in a red dress. I'll always be yours. They kissed again, softer this time, sweeter. Around them, the reception continued, music and laughter and celebration. But in that moment, they were the only 2 people in the world. Later, they slipped outside to a terrace overlooking the city lights. Snow had started to fall, gentle flakes catching in Elena's hair. I have something to tell you, Damien said, his arms around her from behind, her back against his chest. What? I've been in therapy too. Elena turned in his arms to look at him. Really? He nodded. After that day at the cafe, after you left Adrian, I realized something. I'd spent 6 years blaming Vanessa for my inability to connect with people. But the truth was, I'd built my fortress to keep everyone out. And that wasn't her fault. That was mine. Damien, let me finish. He took a breath. I didn't want to come to you still broken, still hiding behind walls. I wanted to do the work, to figure out how to be vulnerable, how to trust, how to be the partner you deserve. So I've spent these 3 months in therapy, learning how to tear down my own walls. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You did that for yourself. I did it for me, he agreed. But also for us. For the possibility of us. Because Elena, I don't want to be half a person coming to you expecting you to complete me. I want to be whole, so we can be 2 whole people choosing to build something together. She kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. How did I get so lucky? I ask myself the same thing every day. Damien wiped her tears with his thumbs. So what happens now? Elena smiled. Now we take it slow. We date. We learn each other. We build something real and honest and ours. Slow, Damien repeated, like he was testing the word. I can do slow. Probably. Maybe. She laughed. You're a billionaire who built an empire before 40. I think you can handle slow. With you. He pulled her closer. I can handle anything. They stood on the terrace while snow fell around them. 2 people who'd been broken and lonely finding each other in the wreckage. 2 people who'd chosen themselves first and now got to choose each other. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. It was real. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a different classroom. This time at the community college's new building, funded by an anonymous donation that everyone suspected came from Damien, but no one could prove. She taught Jane Eyre to a new group of students, and when she got to her favorite line, asterisk, I would always rather be happy than dignified asterisk, she smiled. Because she'd learned the truth of it. She'd chosen happiness over the dignity of staying in a marriage that was killing her. She'd chosen herself over security. She'd chosen growth over comfort. And in choosing herself, she'd found love. Not the desperate, clinging love of someone who needed saving, but the strong, steady love of 2 whole people choosing each other every day. Her phone buzzed during her break. A text from Damien. Asterisk dinner tonight? I'm cooking. By cooking I mean ordering from that Italian place you love. Asterisk. Elena laughed and typed back, asterisk perfect. I'll bring the wine, asterisk. Asterisk you're perfect. The wine is just a bonus, asterisk. She shook her head, smiling, and pocketed her phone. That evening, she'd go to Damien's penthouse, which no longer felt like a fortress but like a home, especially since she'd started keeping a toothbrush there and he'd cleared out a bookshelf just for her collection. They'd eat dinner and talk about their days. She'd tell him about Maria, who was now considering grad school. He'd tell her about the new affordable housing development he was building, the one he'd named Elena Gardens to her mortified delight. Later, they'd curl up on his couch, their couch now really, and read together in comfortable silence. Just existing in each other's space, no performance required. And when she left to go home to her own apartment, because she wasn't ready to give up her independence yet, and he respected that, he'd kiss her goodbye and tell her he loved her. And she'd believe it. Because this love wasn't about being saved or completing each other or any of the fairy tale nonsense she'd once believed in. This love was about seeing and being seen. About two people who'd done the hard work of becoming whole on their own, then choosing to build something together. This love was about red dresses and coffee shop confessions and having the courage to choose yourself first. This love was real. And Elena Reyes, teacher, survivor, woman who'd learned to be happy rather than dignified, finally understood what love was supposed to feel like. The red dress hung in Elena's closet in Damien's penthouse, right next to the emerald one from Ryan's wedding. She'd moved in 3 months ago, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because she'd proven to herself that she could live alone, and now she was choosing not to. They'd gotten engaged on the anniversary of the day they met, Damien presenting her with a ring at the Harrington Gala, right where it all started, while wearing the biggest smile she'd ever seen. You exploded my life, she'd told him, laughing through tears. In the best way, he'd asked. In the best way. The wedding was planned for spring, small, intimate, just the people who mattered. Maria was invited. So were her students. Damien's brother would be best man. And Elena would walk down the aisle alone, because she didn't need anyone to give her away. She belonged to herself. But tonight, there was a charity gala. Another one at the Harrington estate. Elena stood in front of the mirror, wearing the red dress that had started everything. Damien came up behind her, already in his tuxedo, and met her eyes in the reflection. Still my favorite dress, he said. Still your favorite woman? Elena teased. Always. He kissed her neck. Though I'm biased. I think you're extraordinary in anything. Or nothing. She laughed and swatted at him. Behave. We have a gala. Do we have to go? We could stay here. Order Chinese food. Read poetry. We're going. Elena turned in his arms. Because a year ago, I walked into a ballroom in this dress feeling invisible. And tonight, I want to walk in feeling seen. With the man who taught me I was worth seeing. Damien's expression softened. You taught yourself that, Elena. I just reminded you. Then we reminded each other. She straightened his bow tie. Come on, let's go make an entrance. They arrived at the gala fashionably late. When Elena walked into the ballroom, the same ballroom where this had all started, heads turned. But not because of scandal or gossip. Because she was radiant. Because happiness looked good on her. Because the woman in the red dress wasn't trying to be seen anymore. She simply was. Damien's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. No regrets, he asked quietly. Elena looked at him, this man who'd exploded into her life and changed everything. Then she looked around the ballroom at the life she'd built. Her career, her independence, her hard-won happiness. Not a single one, she said. And she meant it. Because sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who reminds you that you were complete all along. Elena chose herself first, then chose love. What's one brave choice you've made or need to make for yourself? Share your story in the comments. Your courage might inspire someone else to choose themselves too. And if this story touched you, let us know. We all need reminders that it's never too late to reclaim our lives. Asterisk.